Greetings and a very warm welcome to you all. Thank you for joining Global Peace Studies for Sustainable Development in Africa. I'm George Mutalemwa, moderating this session on behalf of the Africa Peace and Development Network, MAMA. Today, we focus on peace and stability through homegrown democracy. The speaker is Dr. Colins Imoh from the University of Bradford, the United Kingdom, where he teaches international relations, politics, and security studies. It is an honor and a pleasure having you, Brother Colins. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Colins Imoh.
Thank you, George, for that warm welcome. Let me see if I can share my slide. But first of all, thank you for this. I hope I'll be able to do justice to this topic. It's a topic that is still being developed. Like when George invited me to have this, share this conversation, I told him this is a paper I'm working on. So I'm open to ideas and, it's still in the works. So please feel free to, give input on how it can make better. It's quite something I liked to do, but it's still on its stage. When George was telling me, I was thinking about why not just take a paper you've already worked on. But I decided, no, let's take this one and see how it goes. Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Okay, you can see it. Okay,
Yes.
okay. So so thank you, George, and the whole team in Mama for inviting me to this to make this presentation. Just to begin by, we're having a conference in Bradford on 22nd to 24th of May. So I encourage everybody, please join us in Bradford between 22nd to 24th of May to explore the concept of shaping African future, looking at issues of innovation, integration, and then and then looking at it within five thematic areas. But again, I'm not here to talk about the conference. I told George that maybe that could be an easier topic. Talk about the conference and talking about this complex topic I want to talk about today. So first, uh, my name is Colins Imoh. George has already introduced me. In my other life, I used to be a practitioner before I decided to go into the academia and take a PhD, and then after that, found myself teaching. So at times, I see where my heart as a practitioner. So trying to make this presentation, I was thinking, am I making an academic presentation? Am I making a presentation as a practitioner? But I said, you know what? I'm going to try to make a blend of two, looking at my practice and also looking at my scholastic work. And again, again, uh, you're free to criticize me. Maybe I'm romanticizing Africa a lot in this presentation, but please bear with me. I'm African and I have a love for Africa. So at times there might be the perception of, Thomas' romanticization of the concept of Africa. Again, in this presentation, when I use the term West or Western, I use it in a very loose term, which can mean anything. It can mean the Western European colonizers. It can mean Western democratic concept. So it can mean a lot of things. So whenever I use the term, Western in this presentation, I'm using it in a very, very loose term. So please bear with me. And of course, if you're free also to yes, next. You're free also in terms of giving a feedback in it. So that's about the introduction about the context of this paper. The title of this paper is Peace and Stability Through Homegrown Democracy. When I was thinking about this paper, what I was thinking about is Africa. Again, this paper is a lot based on Nigeria, but I draw a lot of context on Africa. So again, pardon the generalization a lot when I talk about Africa and talk about Nigeria as if Africa is one monolithic place. No, it's not. So when I was thinking about peace and stability through home democracy, my concept is to explore the challenges and opportunities facing Nigerian democratic transition looking at the democratic system is not perfect. There's no democratic system that is perfect. Every country designs their system based on their history. What does this mean? It means that the development of the democratic system is based on the history, the culture, the value of a people. Therefore, it is not monolithic. Each is quite different. And the basis is that if the democratic system is designed based on the values, the histories, the culture of a people, it should bring stability and it should bring peace. And the essence is that the people's voice are heard and considered. But what we see in Nigeria and maybe most African countries is that the voice of the people are not being heard. And I am saying that this is because, the most of the democratic method being adopted in countries in Africa, Western-inspired democratic methods, and they are not effective in all contexts. And I said, look, the democratic system in Nigeria and its effectiveness is questionable because it's not based on the local reality. It's not based on the historic issue. It's not based on the political, rate in Nigeria. And that has a lot of undertone leading to what I call, what, of course, there's a whole lot of literature in it about elite capture. When the elite captures the political space, leading to instability and social unrest. So this paper draws a lot on the elite theory framework. And this paper argues that, this presentation argues that a most sustainable and inclusive approach to democratic governance is necessary. And the way it's going to be done is by prioritizing public deliberation, citizens' participation, and respect for local customs and tradition. And Nigeria can build a democratic system that generally reflects its people's aspiration. Of course, this means shifting from the top-bottom approach, going, the top-bottom elite-driven approach to a more inclusive bottom-up approach that does what? That empowers the citizens to be able to shape their destiny. And this is what I call homegrown democracy. A democracy, a system that prioritizes public deliberation, citizen participation, and respects the custom and tradition of the people. So I now look at what is the structure of this presentation? Okay, fine. So what is the structure of this presentation? This presentation I structured first of all looking at, what is the conceptualizing of peace? How do we conceptualize peace? What does peace mean to us? Because if we're talking about peace and stability through homegrown democracy, we should understand what does peace mean. And then after, I'll talk about what is democracy. Who's democracy? What exactly does democracy mean? Then the next point is African means of political organization, which I said the political organization in Africa is about consensus. It's not about winner takes all. Then the fourth part of this presentation, I'll now look at Nigeria and the journey so far and the whole issue of political, instability in Nigeria, and then come down to end it by saying, look, the solution to this, to these anomalies is to go back to the drawing board and design a democratic system that is based on the culture, the history, of the people. So now I'm back again to this slide. Now, so when we talk about peace, what exactly do we mean by peace? How do we conceptualize peace? You know, I like this, iceberg model, what talks about direct violence, structural, cultural violence. I'm sure all of us know about Johan Galtung, groundbreaking work. So at times what we see is a very little part compared to the structural and the cultural issues that sustain the little direct violence we see. Then when we look at issue of peace, are we looking at peace as the absence of violence, the absence of war, the reduction of peace, or the reduction of violence? Or do we want to look at peace as the presence of positive relationship, the presence of harmony? So our conceptualization of peace, our conceptualization of stability goes a long way in terms of how do we measure the workability of democracy in the continent, or specifically in Nigeria. Do we look at it as because there is an absence of war? Of course, there's a whole lot of conflict all over the place, or do we look at it as the presence of peaceful relationship? I would want to go into it, I want to look at it from the concept of a peaceful relationship in harmony in communities among individuals. So if we look at it within that concept, the big question we should ask ourselves is that in Nigeria today, in most countries in Africa, do we have positive relationship? If we don't have positive relationship, why do we not have positive relationship? Has democracy played a role in promoting positive relationship? So this presentation today is questioning that the democracy we have in Nigeria has not been able to do what? To promote peace and stability because it is not grown, it's not homegrown, it's not adapted to the rarity of the people. So now let's talk about what is democracy. Democracy, again, there's a whole lot of work, about democracy. People have different conception of democracy. But I want to look at democracy as a system in which people are directly involved in their affairs, deciding how they want to rule themselves. What are the implications of this? The implication of this is that as population grow, the need to move from direct democracy to what we call representative democracy, emerge because everybody cannot come together to do what? To take a decision. Because everybody cannot come together to take a decision, there have to be some means of selecting representative. This representative, therefore, help to make the decision for the people. So that's what representative democracy is about. However, the essence remains the same. Democracy could mean different things to different people based on their ideology. But the core essence is that democracy is a system of governance by the people. And what it means that the people need to believe in it. If people do not believe in the democratic system, it will not work. So, and this we look at across Nigeria, across Africa. The question is that is the democratic method, the democratic system that is being practiced, is it acceptable to the people? Has the people imbibed it? Is it working? I think the jury is out that probably the system has not worked on the way it should work. Because my argument in this paper is that because it has not reflected the reality of the people. So democracy, again, is about an inclusive system of governance. Democracy has its merit based on its values. It's essential to recognize that every system, every country adopt its democracy based a lot on their history. Look at the French Revolution and how the French Revolution shaped the French democracy. Look at the signing of the Magna Carta in England, how it shaped the United Kingdom's democracy. Look at the struggle for independence in the US, how that shaped, the democracy we have in the US. And then the question we should ask ourselves, how has the democracy, how has our history shaped the democratic process in Africa or in Nigeria? Again, we'll say democracy as a universal ideology. It is a universal ideology, but every society decides for itself. How do we define it? How do we practice it? So it's not an all cap fits all, but it has a certain principle. Some of the principle is about freedom of assembly, freedom of association, freedom of religion, freedom of speech, citizenship, voting right, the right to life, the right to liberty, and also minority right. These are all rights embedded in what we talk about democracy. But the core essence of it is that it is a system of governance by the people. It is the people that decide how the democracy should be, should work. It shouldn't be imposed from outside. So if we now look at the democracy generally, again, now we need to look at how does it work in Africa. Again, we've talked about that there are different models of democracy practiced in different parts of the world. But the common understanding is that it is about how a group of people decide to work, to organize and govern themselves. So, it's about the people deciding this is how we want to organize ourselves. The implication is that there are various relationships that come together for the good. So the essence of all of it is how do people come together to arrange a terms for participation? How do we conform an exchange of reason rather than confrontation. How do people come together and decide, you know what, we need to deliberate and then decide on what we want to do. So democracy is a universal ideology. But like Akin, and like West said, people at times might mistake some specific practicality of democracy as universal. Take example, market-driven economic mode of economy. You know, there is the perception that the market-driven economy is prerequisite for democracy, but that's not true. It just certain democracies practice a market-driven capitalist mode. It does not mean that every democracy must practice a market terms of a market capitalist form. So these are part of the issues in terms of how do we actually look at democracy. Then let's look at African democracy. Again, the African, I'll quote a lot of, from a lot of scholars, the African traditional political system are an essential part of the African political landscape. It talks about how do the sub-communities, govern themselves, independent, related towards the national and institutional setup. So political system and traditional organized community vary in many dimensions. If you look at the Bungada Kingdom in Uganda, they have a horizontal organization. If you look at greater clans in Somalia, they have, a different, they have a horizontal, while the Buganda Kingdom have a hierarchical system. But again, when you look at Western scholars, tend to describe African traditional political system as either monarchical or aristocratic. There is no, you can very find few reference that talked about the democratic system of governance in traditional African society. The essence is that before the coming of the European colonizers in Africa, that Africa has no democracy. But like I've said earlier, democracy is about how people decide to govern themselves. So once people decide how they govern themselves, then that's democracy. But the problem is that it's assumed that the Western imported democratic method is the only method that can work in Africa. Africans are not passive recipients of democracy. If you go to the Ashanti Kingdom, if you go to the Yoruba Kingdom, if you go to the Igbos, there's a whole of organized system of African governance system. But the problem is this system, based on the colonial experience, did not recognize the importance, the practice of this system. So what happened was a situation where this system were bastardized, were not recognized, and a new important system was introduced. And this, in most cases, has some kind of conflict between the people and, between people and the governed. So there is a disconnection. Then going back to this, again, Buham talked about, coloniality rests on the epistemic and ontological biases that promote validation of European hegemony and superiority while invalidating, marginalizing, and eroding the knowledge, experience, and right of colonized people. What is the implication of this? The whole essence of the European experience is, to more like to marginalize, to recognize, the impact and the knowledge base. So what are we saying? That based on the experiences, the positive governance structure of most communities were not recognized. And what are the implications of that recognition, non-recognition of those structures is that African countries, Nigeria, now adopted a system that has not worked for them. Because again, during the colonial experience, the colonizers did not recognize that there is anything good or there is much good within the African or the indigenous system of governance. So the indigenous system of governance need to be replaced by a system that in most cases is alien, it's at times alien to what the people feels and want. So now coming again at, now we've looked at the African system, in terms of what was the situation in Africa before the coming of the colonizers. And now we look at how do Africans resolve actually their dispute. African preferred means of resolving conflict has always been by consensus. This involves hearing all parties, agreeing on the best solution for community. In this scenario, the community takes precedence. It's not about the individual, it's about the community. So at each point in time, the community looks at what would be for the best interest of the community. This king is a symbol. Just like I said in my other slide, there is the whole idea to think that all African, Nigerian system are more autocratic, monarchical system where the king is all powerful. But in most society, the king is a symbol. The king authority also vested with the council. The king represents the lineage between the present and the ancestors. So the king plays a lot of spiritual role. But again, there is that confusion is a king always autocratic? Again, most communities, like I said, is not a monolithic system. Most communities have autocratic system. Some communities has a council. But the general is that in most, a deliberative consensus method is about the preferred system. Therefore, governance is not about winning, but about recognizing competing views of the people. It's never about the majority, but about the well-being of the people. So when people sit in council to have a deliberation to decide what to happen, a lot of voices are heard. And at the end of the day, decisions are taken, not about the majority, but about what is good for the community. However, post-African countries were introduced with democratic structures, modeled closely to the legacies introduced by the colonial masters. And again, most of these are not in conformity with the reality, the everyday experience of the people. So there is a disconnect between the reality of the new emerging countries and the imposed democratic practice. And this becomes a source of conflict. It becomes we and them. So the new emerging state faced multiple problems as they realized that, the illusion of independence or the illusion of greatness by achieving independence has not materialized in the everyday life. This was based on a system that was inherited that did not address the issue of peace, stability, and process and progress. What we have is the foreign slave masters living and with a new local slave masters coming in. So it's one master out of the door, another comes in. So what happened at independence? The colonial masters left, and the Africans took over the government reservation areas, went into those beautiful mansions, ride the beautiful cars, and behave exactly, almost identical with how the oppressors, the colonizers were. So there was nothing have changed. So you just have a new set of masters. There was no idea. There was no, in Nigeria specifically, there was no process of how do we breed a national unity? How do we build a country where we all feel a sense of belonging, where we all feel that we are, one? That did not happen because the elite that took over power were almost like, this is our turn. And I'm going to talk a lot about that when I start interrogating the Nigerian experience. It becomes like one set of, oppressors out, a new set of oppressors. That is the situation in Nigeria. Douglas Campbell, who lived in central Zambia for close to 3 decades, you know, in around the late 19th century, had this to say. He said, all government is by the will of the people, whether it be the choice and the coronation of a king, the selection of a man to fill a new chieftaincy, the framing, proclamation, and proclamation of a new law, the removal of the village from one side to the other, the declaration of war, or the acceptance of terms of peace, everything must be put to the poll and come to be stamped with the imprimatur of the people's way. So Douglas Campbell, who was speaking about his experience of over 30 years, that there is the African democratic method has a lot of the people's been involved. How does this come in? So this actually reaffirm that if the will of the people has continued after independence, where now we've got the independence, let's go back to the drawing table and rejig our democratic process in line with our culture, our values. You know, Nigeria and other countries could have been moving in a tangential. But what happened in Nigeria specifically is that it was, like I said, a new set of masters copying exactly, the values of the colonizers, and that has not led, to growth and progress because you have one set of oppressors out and a new set of oppressors coming in, and that's where the issue of lack of peace, lack of stability has been on. So now looking at, post-colonial experiences, the whole essence of coloniality refers to a long-standing pattern of power that emerged as a result of colonization that defined culture, labor, intersubjective relations, and knowledge production well beyond the strict limit of colonial administration. Thus, coloniality survives colonization. So even though the Europeans have left Africa, have left Nigeria, but coloniality has remained because the colonial power produced a situation in which Western models extinguished the non-Western, including being knowledge and system of governance. So the whole essence is that the imposition of Western civilization in non-Western contexts is implemented through the use of violence and psychological warfare, as well as the establishment of norms and law. So colonialism was not just an episodic event that started and ended with formal decolonization, but a gradual strategy, a grand design that entangles and distorts the local history. So if you take a little bit and say, look, if you we went from the 16th century criticization of people without writing to the 18th and 19th century standardization of people without history, to the 20th century clusterization of people without development, and more recently to the early 21st century of people without democracy. So there's this characterization: a people without writing, a people without history, a people without development, and a people without democracy. So it went from a 16th century right of people to the 18th century right of man, Enlightenment philosophers, and to the late 20th century human rights. All of these are part of global design, articulated but the simultaneous production and reproduction of international division of labor and called, that overlap with the global and racial system. So what we have in this situation is the Western influence reduces, silence, dominates, oppress, exploit, and overshadows post, African agency. These are all quotations from these authors. So these are all more like looking at these are the experiences of Africa, within that content. Then the question is, how does this impact the people? Chinua Achebe is one of my favorite authors, and if I've read his work, Things Fall Apart. There is a very interesting aspect of that book that I love so much. Within that dimension of, there were conflict in the community, and the people came together to deliberate. How are we going to solve this problem that we have? Then the European colonial masters sent people to them and asked them to stop. And the messengers came and said, the white man whose power you know well has ordered this meeting to stop. It is instructive to notice the effect of the powers of the colonial masters that they gave an instruction that a deliberative process aimed at solving a community problem should be stopped. Okonkwo, the tragic hero, of Things Fall Apart, was so embarrassed. How can you do that? He raised up his sword to fight. But, surprisingly, his people were looking at him, they could not fight back. And Chinua said, they put a knife, on the things that held us together and we are falling apart. It is instructive, using this to understand how, the effect of the colonial intervention has shaped the development of democracy in Africa. This is not, a more putting blame, but looking at the effect. So the effect today is that the democratic system has not been able to imbibe the people. I'm going to talk about it when I talk about the framework. It has not been able to imbibe the people. It's all about how do we retain power for the sake of power. Like I said, one group of oppressors out, you have a new set of oppressors coming in. I'll talk a little bit about what is happening in my state, Rivers State, just yesterday about the whole issue of power. So now coming to Nigeria, I've talked a little bit about what peace, I've talked about democracy, I've talked about looking at Africa from a very, very broad perspective. I acknowledge that I spoke about Africa quite broadly. But now let's look about Nigeria. How did the creation of Nigeria come in? In 1914, Lord Lugard, who was the imperial, the administrator of Nigeria, decided that, you see, there is a southern protectorate of Nigeria, there is a colony of Lagos, there is a northern Nigeria. These are different entities. And it started in 1914. You see, for ease of administrative network, let these three distinct group of people. The northern Nigeria has their own distinct way of governance, predominantly Muslim, Hausa, Kanuri, Fulani, outreach, quite distinct culture and different ways of administration. The southern Nigeria has their own different means of administration. But in 1914, without any consultation, strictly for the ease of administrative work of the British colonial rulers, those three colonies, true protectorate of southern Nigeria, protectorate of northern Nigeria, and the colony of Lagos were merged together to an entity called Nigeria. That was 1914. That was how Nigeria came to be. These are different people that have different shared values, different cultures. There was never an attempt to bring them together. What the administration did was a system of indirect rule. In northern Nigeria, they have a really developed caliphate system, emir system. So it was a lot easier for the British administrators to walk through those, those established authorities. So it's called indirect rule. But when the British came down to Eastern Nigeria, it was a different ball game because Eastern Nigeria has they have more like a republican system of governance. So it's about deliberation. There's no king in southeastern Nigeria. So everybody comes together to discuss. So when there's a problem, they discuss. And they found out, oh my God, how can we rule these people? So they started what they call a warrant chief. A warrant chief is somebody is made a chief and made to lord over the people. And because the colonial administrators had a very, they have the power. So it was lorded over the people. And that was how what we call warrant chief. So when in that episode I just described in Things Fall Apart, the people were having a meeting. There was no king. It was a deliberative process to decide what do we do. And, the messengers came and said the meeting should stop. So now if you look at the different entities in Nigeria, and how they came together in 1914 to form to form the country called Nigeria. There was no attempt, nothing for these groups to come together. Even at independence, it's quite strange. In 1957, when the motion for independence was moved, Northern Nigeria said, we're not ready. It's quite strange. When one part of the country said, we're not ready for independence yet. Because if we have independence, we don't have enough people to run. So independence has to be, shaped to when the people are ready. So that gives that helps to understand the basis of this presentation. When you have different people, different groups that have different cultural rarity, different aspirations coming together based on the convenience of the Europeans. But when the Europeans left, the new elites did not do anything to change the dynamics. They continued the process because it serves their advantage. And then in 1966, of course, the honeymoon was over. Nigeria got their independence in 1st October 1960. You know, so within 6 years, there was so much confusion. People felt, look, this country is not working because it wasn't meant to work. When you bring different strange bedfellows together to form a country, and the elites that came at independence were after just, okay, it's our own turn. One set of oppressors out, a new set of oppressors in. There was no method, there was no system to say, how do we get the people, to believe in the system? How can we change the system to work? It did not happen. And that was how the first military coup in 1966 happened. And that military coup led to a whole lot of devastation in Nigeria because it changed the tangential of Nigeria. Because one, again, when you understand that at independence, again, if you understand the structure of Nigeria, we have northern Nigeria, south Nigeria. Within South Nigeria, you have the east and the west. Northern Nigeria are not very educated. So the bulk of the elites, the educated folks, a lot of them were from the southern Nigeria. So the coup of 1966 were by young majors, and it was termed an Imoh coup because it was assumed that majority of those who took part of this coup were from an ethnic group. But the rarity was it wasn't an ethnic group. It was young majors who felt disillusioned and felt there must be an intervention to save the country. And that coup of 1966 led to the sad event of the 90s of the Civil War from 1967 to 1970 that more than a million people died. So you need to look at how does the democratic experience, how does imposition of this, of different groups coming together, how did the elites refuse to manage the situation that led to the first coup in 1966 and that led to the Civil War in 1967? They're all linked together in terms the elites did not do what they are supposed to do. Now, at the end of the Civil War, there was a whole issue of, no winner, no vanquish. But of course, the group that lost the war were actually marginalized and still marginalized to today. Now, the democratic experience continued. Again, the military intervention from 1966, continued, till we had, in 1979, where the military, not because they were so happy, but because the people have felt, were not so much keen again on military rule. They reluctantly gave out power, to civilians. But the question was, what was the preparation for that? The military decided that because the presidential system, I mean the parliamentary system, which was adopted from the British, Nigeria was a British colony, did not work. So let's go to America. Let's take the presidential system of governance. Since the British system did not work, maybe it is the system that is the problem. So the military, without consultation, imposed on the people, the presidential system of governance. So Nigeria practiced the presidential system of governance from 1979. By 1983, there was another coup. Because again, it's not working. So nobody has sat down to ask themselves, why is this not working? It's assumed it's the system, not understanding that the people who are operating this system were not operating it based on the reality of the people. So by 1983, there was another coup. And that coup, led to, there's a coup and there's a counter coup. And again, you need to understand the dynamics of the situation. Then the then head of state, President Muhammad Buhari, now decided to do what they should have done a long time ago. Let's consult the people and ask the people, what do you want? Then there was a political bureau that went through the whole country asking the people, what kind of system do you want? Again, you need to understand that this is the first time that the people are being asked, what do you want? And it was quite a robust, deliberative process. And the people now decided, you know what? We like the socialist system of governance. the socialist system of governance where, the state and the people, things are being provided for people. That is what we want. Again, you need to remember this was in the heart of the Cold War, you know. So the Western, could not hear of this. How can Nigeria, giant of Africa, go to the Soviet? Again, that was when it was the Soviet Union, USSR. How can Nigeria adopt a socialist system of governance? There was a newspaper publication. So when they finished the deliberation, the report was submitted. While the report was still being deliberated, Newswatch magazine published the complete report. And guess what Babangida did? Babangida, who was the head of state then, they proscribed Newswatch magazine for doing what? For publishing the report of the political bureau, which is a consultation of the whole country. The group went around the whole country, collecting memorandum, having, deliberation. And, for publishing the report, the magazine was proscribed. The editors were jailed. And then what did the government do? They took that report of the political bureau and looked at it and said, no, Nigeria is not good enough for socialist system of governance. And then they have to go back to a presidential system. And of course, like I said, this was at the heart of the Cold War. Knowing the dynamics in the Cold War, there's no way the Western powers could have allowed Nigeria to practice a socialist system under at that moment. Again, the reason I'm bringing this out, that we need to understand the linkage. When the people have decided this is what we want, the elites decided that no, what you say you want is not what should happen. So again, that very process, this should change the people having a voice, and that has continued, throughout the time. And of course, the effect, like we said, is a Nigerian state that has, that most people would say is actually a failed state. A state that has failed to do what? To address its deep-seated, grievances within a country. There is a profound sense of loss. Various ethnic group in the country, various ethnic conflict all over the country. Going from the Niger Delta, going down to Boko Haram in the north, going down to former Herder conflict in the Middle Belt. There is just so much conflict going on in the country. And you can look at this as the inability of people to actually resolve their conflict. Why are they not able to resolve their conflict? It's because a country that people have not been able to see themselves as one. So when the people have not been able to see themselves as one, each person sees themselves as we against them. I think I have somewhere I'll talk about that. Okay, yeah, that's it. So it's a situation where people don't see themselves as one. And this looks at what, a lot of work called the dual politics. Many people in Nigeria maintain a strong cultural tradition. What it means is that, why you are in Nigeria, you're first of all from where? From your village. As a matter of fact, every politician registers for election in his or her village. So on election day, a politician that lives in Abuja leaves Abuja and goes to his village in Adoni to go and vote, because his existence, his political relevance is to his people. So again, when you need to understand the structure of Nigeria, in most parts of the world, there's what they call, your state of residence. Where are you from? Is the state where you live. If you live in New York, you're from New York. If you live in California, you're from California. If you live in Ohio, you're from Ohio. No, it is not like that in Nigeria. There's what we call the state of origin. Your state of origin is where your grandfather is from. You might never have been to that state, but that's where you are from. So when you're filling your form, you're not filling your state of residence. It's your state of origin. Origin is where you come from. So there is that idea, this is where my entitlement is. And what does it mean? It means that if you have a thief from your village who happen to be, a politician who steals resources, you don't think he's wrong. It's from my village, it's my people. How can your people be wrong? So the whole essence of political power is about how do we capture power for our own people. So it's not about the unity of the country, because every group of the country try to do what? To take power for their own sake. So when you get power, you do things for your people. The president, and a lot of people say, oh, the past president, Buhari, was so, ethnic minded. All the appointments were to the Hausa Fulani, to the Northerners. Now we have a Yoruba president. Now everybody's saying all the appointment is to the Yorubas and those people. And again, but you need to understand within the structure of how the system works. It's a system that recognizes where people come from, not necessarily talking about the collective good of the country. And that has been the bane of the lack of instability in Nigeria. Then you can look at to the framework of this work, where I'm looking at this work from the elite theory. So this paper challenged the notion that Nigerian democratic experience, it's within the light of early theory. Why democracy is being idealized as a system of government, the reality in Nigeria is that power has always been concentrated in the hands of the few. And that's the reason why there've not been peace and stability in Nigeria. Because the few where those power is being concentrated are not using it for the good of the people, but instead for the good of the elites, those who decide. So what the claim in terms of elite theory, that elites hold their position of power due to their exceptional ability and ability to manipulate. And that's exactly the situation in Nigeria, where each of those elites, each time, like I said earlier, their election, they go down to their villages. So they get things and they manipulate the system in the village, in order to do what? To get to go hold on to power. And holding on to power is not for the good of the whole community, but rather for the good of the elites. So if you look at the elite, it's about elite capture, where power is captured not for its own sake, not for the good of the country, but for the good of the elite at every point in time. That has been the situation with Nigeria, and that's still the reason why you know, why progress has not been made. I'll give you a very classic example. Just yesterday, I live in Port Harcourt. Port Harcourt is, in the south Nigeria. Port Harcourt, River State is the heart of the oil industry. At the last election, the outgoing governor of the state, Yusuf Wike, asked, facilitated, the election of a new governor. But he never wanted the governor to rule. He wanted to rule by proxy. And then the governor decided no, to exert his own independence. And for the last year and a half, there's been a lot of problem in Rivers State because of the tussle of power. Yesterday, the president of the country declared a state of emergency in Rivers State and removed the governor. This is undemocratic. Again, the problem is between Wike and the governor. Wike is a minister to the president. So why not the president calling Wike to order? So why would so the president gave Wike as the minister of the Federal Republic. This is a very juicy, appointment that gives Wike a lot of power. So Wike has been causing a lot of, trying to, a lot of issues in the state. So just yesterday, the president declared a state of emergency. But there is a constitutional provision about how you can declare a state of emergency. This constitutional provision was not followed. Again, we're talking about the early, because River State have a lot of resources, so much resources, that the person that controls those resources is extremely powerful. Yesterday, I was talking to one of my friends who is a politician in River State. We had almost like a 2 hours conversation. He told me clearly, he said it's about, power. That they worked for this governor, and the governor came into power and decided to remove the structure and is forming his own structure. He said what it means that they and all his group are jobless. He said, how can they have invested their time in making this guy a governor, and then the guy decided he wants to walk, and therefore he wants to destroy their structure? because it's a structure that makes them to be able to bring people to power. So what they said the governor is trying to do, he's trying to destroy that structure so that things can work in the state. And again, the elite, represented by the president, decided to truncate it by proclaiming a state of emergency, and the governor had been removed for 6 months. And then nobody's going to know what's going to happen within that 6 months. So again, this tells you a classic situation of the situation in Nigeria. This is just happening yesterday. And of course, the problem in Rivers State has been ongoing for quite some time, because the governor decided, you know what, I'm not going to allow you access to the treasury of the state. We're going to use the resources of the state to work for the people. So again, if you look at this framework in terms of elite capture, that gives you the whole idea about the situation in Nigeria. And again, going down again to what I said earlier about how each of the politicians, where it is being manipulated as we against them. So the elite try to manipulate the people. By manipulating the people, they try to put people against each other. So while a lot of people say, oh, the problem with Nigeria is religion, the problem with Nigeria is ethnicity. No, the problem with Nigeria is not ethnicity. The problem with Nigeria is not religion. The problem with Nigeria is the elite manipulation, the elite capture. Elite capture the political and economic system and use that to perpetuate themselves in power. They manipulate the people by saying is the Hausa against the Igbos, is the Fulanis against. No, it's Muslims against Christian, it's Igbos against Yoruba. It is not true. Those who foment this issue are the elite who use that as a means to remain in power. And the reason why there's not been peace and stability in Nigeria is strictly because the democracy is not working. The democracy is structured in such a way that the elite continue to capture power and use that for their own advantage. So that is the situation. So you have this whole issue of we against them at every point in time. So now the question now comes to, where do we go from here? How do we now, constitutionalize a democracy that can work for us? Again, you need to now understand the whole issue of identity. Just like West argued, identity is a mark of how people seek protection, recognition, and association in the world. So if we have to design a democratic system, we need to look at a democratic system that works for the people, that gives power back to the people. And it is the people that determines the democratic culture. So what we have in Nigeria presently is elite who decide a system that benefits them. They don't care what the people thinks, because the elite has captured the whole space. So again, like Darry said, claim that countries that move forward are countries that have walked their path and led. Democracy is not uniform. It differs from countries to countries. And like Darry said, our values influences and shapes our democracy. So if we want to change the democratic system in Nigeria, where we need to look for, first of all, is to say, how do we restructure what we presently have? How do we rejig it to reflect giving power back to the people? Because presently, the people have no power. The power has been taken away from them by the elites who have decided to use this power for their own sake. There is this a survey that was done by Afrometer that talked about looking at what are the people's perception about leadership. Why am I bringing this? It's about, do people actually have more faith in traditional institutions than they have, for governance, structure, for constitutional structure. And the survey said across 22 countries surveyed between late 2019, just hold on. Yeah. Said across 22 countries surveyed between late 2019 and early 2021, Africans consistently express greater trust in traditional chiefs than in elected leaders, often by a wide margin. Nearly two-thirds, 64%, trust traditional leaders somewhat or a lot, compared to 49 for president, 43 for councillors, and just 39 for members of parliament. So, what does it tell you? It tells that, look, much as we have a political system that is built on this elected, representative, but the reality is that people do not trust them. So the question we should ask ourselves is, how do we develop a system where people are able to do what? To trust, to trust the system. What do I mean? Where people are able to trust those who are elected. If in a situation where local councillors are those who are your local representative, you don't even trust them. And the members of parliament who goes to the parliament to represent you, that's 9% of trust. It shows there is something that is wrong with the system. So this again reinforces my argument that we need to go to a system, we need to go back to the drawing board where we need to design a system that actually works, a system that recognizes the people so that people can participate. The hallmark of democracy rests about participation, deliberation. So if you have a system where the people do not believe in it, how can it work? And that's why the system has not been working. And that's why there are conflict and instability. And then it goes down to my final point, which is about homegrown democracy. My argument is that we need to go back to the basis. And the basis is that we need to have a homegrown democracy that is not associated with a Western conception. Every community sit down together and say, what is our values? What is our culture? How can we use our values and culture to develop a system that works for us? It mustn't be every country. If you look at the French system, it's different. Look at the English system, it's different. When you tell the Americans, oh, we'll have the king as the head of government. Oh my God. How can you have an unelected monarch as the head of government? For the Americans, it looks strange. But for the English person, it is part of their culture. If you study the culture of the history of English, you find out how the powers of the king, of the queen, the monarch was reduced. Like I talked about the Magna Carta, till we have the system we have now. So the system evolved over a system. Go to Switzerland, they have their own system. Go to French, they have their own system. Every country develop a system that is structured according to their culture and their value, and the people allow you to work. But when you have a system that is not embodiment of your values, of your culture, of your tradition, it's an imposition. So the majority of the people have not been able to accept it. So if you look at this survey again, this survey tells you a lot. That majority of the people do not even trust those who are in that system. So it means that we need to go back to how do we have a structure that allow people to be governed based on their cultural values, their belief and none, so that it is the people who should decide. That's what I call the homegrown democracy. So again, if you look at Nigeria, there's a whole lot of failures and successes based on democratic experience. But I know I'm already short of time, so I will skip about talking about Nigeria, the experiences of success and failure in our democratic experience, and just go straight to maybe where do we go from here? Looking at our democratic experience and failures, where do we go from here? Though the state of democracy in Nigeria is marked by instability, it appears to be going on a downward trend. I just told you what happened yesterday. And if you understand that the current president of Nigeria, President Bola Ahmed Tinubu, has been in government for a long time. He has been part of the fighters of democracy. So he's supposed to be he was in the trenches doing the military rule, fighting the military, for the military to leave power. And then this person is now the president. So you expect him to have democratic culture. But he just declared a state of emergency to favor his friend, his associate, who is a minister in his government. So the whole issue of democracy in Nigeria has gone to a totally downward trend. So a democratic system must be inclusive, responsive to the people's wishes, and must align with their culture and tradition. Like I said, democracy is built around people's reality and their experience. So for democracy to work, it must meet the need of the people. Democracy is not about conducting election. They hold a lot of perception that democracy is about election. Oh, we're having election, election is going. So at times when you want to look at indices of democracy, oh, there's a regular election. But the question is that how are those elections conducted? Does the election reflect the wishes, the aspiration of the people? Again, when you look at the report of most of the election monitoring, you keep wondering, how credible are the election monitors? Are they actually monitoring election based on the reality, or they're monitoring based on the dictates of their home country? So the way forward is that we need to have a process to achieve this homegrown democratic system is through deliberative framework. So deliberative democracy is a participatory approach to decision making where all citizens have equal opportunity to actually engage in open discussion. Because what we're having now is a situation where citizens are not involved in the decision making. The representative democracy is not working. A system needs to change. So in conclusion, how do we move from here? So how do we move from here? Nigeria is grappling with a lot of complex and widespread conflict, from the volatile situation in the north to the Boko Haram in the north, the farmer herder conflict, in the middle belt, in the southeast. Again, there's so much, armed conflict, in the southeast. There's the Boko Haram insurgency. So the question is that how do we move from all this? So I'm arguing in this paper that the nature of this conflict has left Nigeria in perpetual turmoil, demanding sustained attention and resolution. So Nigerian democratic journey has been fraught with challenges, and most of it has to do with weak institutions. So to address this issue, Nigeria must engage and adopt an inclusive and participatory approach to government. This can be through what we call the homegrown democracy. Nigeria also, societies, need to move by transforming individuals from their self-interest. Just like we look at what happened yesterday in Rivers State, we need to move from the self-interest and to look at what is the community common good. So democratic deliberation process is a valuable tool that can be used to achieve public reason, because it will diminish elite manipulation. What we have a lot now is elite manipulation. But when we have a democratic, homegrown democratic system, it will reduce the elite manipulation, because this is the foundation of democracy, the whole issue of people participating. Again, there's no ideal democracy. So every country must do what? Must determine its democracy. I remember the American Declaration of Independence. That American Declaration of Independence captures that road. It says, to secure these rights to life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, government are instituted among men, deriving their powers from the consent to be governed. Whenever any form of government becomes destructive of this end, is it the right of the people to alter or abolish it? To institute new government, laying its foundation on such principles and organizing its power in such form, to them shall seem more likely to affect their safety. So the American Declaration of Independence acknowledges that power rests with the people. So what I'm proposing is that we need to go back to the drawing board to design this system where power goes to the people. Fourthly, we need to look at a new democratic process that will eliminate elite capture and give power back to the people. This approach diminishes the winner takes all, which seems the prevailing attitude in Nigeria. This will lead to citizens being able to do what? To give and take. And finally, we need to look at, the issue of equality. Equality is the only way to attain a just society. The role of ethnicity is acknowledged. Nigeria has a quite diverse ethnic population, more than 200 ethnic groups. But the problem of Nigeria is not ethnicity. You know, to further substantiate this argument, ethnicity is a tool, but it is not a significant driver of conflict. The elites use ethnicity, to remain in power. So while ethnicity can be a tool elites use to mobilize support, there are other causes of conflict. Therefore, as in social contract, the people will be willing to give up some of their rights, some of their privileges, some of their privilege to ethnic solidarity for democracy. Just like Rawls confirmed that engaging in public reasoning means deliberating within a framework of one's sincere hold belief. So we're talking about, when we look at Rawls, public conception, the political conception of justice, which expresses political values, and an other free and equal citizen will be reasonably expected to endorse. So the first step we need to take in Nigeria is that everyone need to believe that everybody is equal. If everybody believes everyone is equal, then there is a situation where everybody can sit down at the table to discuss. And when they discuss, they deliberate and decide a system that will work. That deliberative process has not happened. And that's the reason why there's so much conflict. There must be a time, and the time has come, when the citizens, the people, need to sit down in a deliberative process to decide to decide exactly how Nigeria should rule. So Nigeria's various challenges hinders growth of robust democracy. The political contestation and communal, ethnic, religious, and social rivalry impact democracy. But it is not, things are not that bad that it cannot be repaired. All we need to do is to come back, to reason together and find a solution to Nigerian problem. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much indeed, Collins, for this wonderful presentation. And yes, power rests with the people. And we thank you really for this presentation on peace and stability through homegrown democracy. And now we welcome participants here to ask questions or make comments on this really informative and rich presentation. We start with Magdalene. Welcome, Magdalene DeYoung.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I want to say thank you to Prof. Collins. That was really wonderful presentation. I learned so much. So I am Magdalene, and I am from Nigeria, from the Niger Delta region of Nigeria, where Prof had earlier mentioned. I just want to say thank you for your final note on homegrown democracy. So I like very much where you mentioned that Nigeria was in fact imposed on the people of Nigeria, and which has contributed to the conflict and all the issues, the crisis that is going on. So I grew up with my grandparent, and there was never a time where it was like, oh, I am Nigeria. It was like, no, I am from here, and this is being our culture. So the Nigeria came about, and everyone was forced to be Nigeria. But before Nigeria, we were different things and from different places. So that contradictions were not actually resolved. If people actually want to be, people were never consulted. From what I learned in history, to be, if they want to be in Nigeria, and then you forced everyone into it, and then you imposed, rule, laws, and all of that on them. So I want to appreciate that very much. And I want to also appreciate you, Prof, on mentioning Chinua Achebe, Things Fall Apart. I read that when I was in school, and I recently am still reading about how Okonkwo himself was very shocked. It aggrieved him so much how colonialism, how the Western powers or the Western rules at that time was introduced to the culture of the people and totally disseminated the people and disintegrated the people. And we asked as young people, why? How could they do this? And we learned that it was through violence, that the people resisted so much that some who could not join them had to die, were actually killed through this violence. And then this colonial, became a thing, not even of the past, and even till today. Me personally, I believe that people are still colonized in Nigeria. I also, not to take so much time, just wondering, this homegrown democracy, Prof, how do we resolve the issue of Nigeria as a thing? How do we get people to now feel like, before the homegrown solution, how do we get people to see themselves first as Nigeria before there is a homegrown democracy? Or how do we address the contradiction of Nigeria itself? What kind of participatory option should happen when the current president of the country is a Yoruba man who doesn't obviously care about the people of the South or the people of the East? What kind of president do we need to have, first of all, to address the issue, the contradiction of Nigeria? Do you think the current president would even think of having anything to do with bringing the people together when disintegrating the people is what he used as a tool to rule, even as of today? And also, I am wondering, there is a lot of non-profit organizations in Nigeria, all across the conflict regions, to the Niger Delta, to the Boko Haram in the north, to the headers clash in the middle, just like you have mentioned. Now we have NGOs, foreign funded NGOs all around talking about issues of peace. They are talking about democracy, going around having meetings. And I just kept wondering, the goals of these NGOs, is it actually to resolve this issue? And if it has it even made has it even made anything because the conflict continues despite this? The issue continues. So my question is just around, what do we need to do first for everyone to see themselves as Nigeria? Then we can now talk about the homegrown democracy. Thank you very much, Prof.
All right. Thank you, Madeline, for that contribution and question. You're right in what your assertion. The rarity of Nigeria is just like you did mention. When you have strange bedfellows coming together, and there've not been an effort to have a deliberative process for them to be one. That is the heart of the problem. And you rightly also pointed it that, like I did mention, it's about elite capture. The elite are not interested, in to willingly give up power. So it's like what you call, it's like mass suicide, you know, elite suicide. So would they willingly give up power? Because it's their source. If you understand, during the last election, the president's campaign was Emeloko. Emeloko means it is my turn. So the whole of his campaign is built that he has been in the political trench room for a long time, and this is his turn to be president. He said, nobody can stop me. This is my time to be president. That's what he said. So to answer your question is that we need to challenge the elites. We need to challenge the elite. But the problem is, just like most people in Nigeria, most elite in Nigeria, the middle class, are waiting for my turn by turn. So everybody is waiting. Okay, it's my turn to have a piece of the pie. So nobody wants to rock the boat. Nobody wants to change the system. So the system is not changed because what? People want to do what? To get their turn. So the people now start, so the individual perspective, the individual is the driving force, not the community. I told you the conversation I had with my friend yesterday. He told me, "Sir Collins, we have invested in this. Therefore, we cannot let go. What's happening in River State? No, we cannot. Sim need to go so that we that helped him so that we can get our own share." So it's about the individual. And the whole essence of the communal conception of the communal basis has been destroyed. So how do we go about it? We need to start again from the basis. And starting from the basis is that we need to now stay within our sphere of influence and start having this deliberation in terms of what is actually the common good. What should we do? Because the Nigerian ship is about to wreck. Because there is a limit to what the people can take. That's the situation. But again, let's go back again a little bit in time, to things fall apart, to advent of colonial issue. Just like I did mention, I read a lot about it deliberately to allow people to understand that what we have here is an extension of coloniality. The Western colonial powers has gone, but the inheritors of the system has refused to reform the system to work. The reason why they have refused the system to work is because they are gaining from the system. So it is not the fault of the European colonial masters. No. The European colonial masters at the time did what they need to do for their convenience, for their selfish reason. But Nigeria got their independence in 1960. We're talking about 60 years from now. So 60 years from now, why has the elite not been able to reform the system? Simple reason. The elite are not interested. The elites want to continue in power. So for this to change, the people need to rise up. There need to be a mass movement outside the established political power to change the status quo. That's for me how it needs to happen. Within the political system, it will not work. You are in River State, you are in the Niger Delta. You see what's happening in River State. It's a classic example of a governor that decided, I want to be independent so I can do things for the people. And the elite who brought him to power said, oh, we brought you to power. Now you don't want to give us our own share of the resources. And they're fighting him. So my thinking is that the change will not work through the political system. It has to work by a mass movement deciding to change the system and then start a deliberative process. That's one. And then the second issue you talked about NGOs, whether their goals. I was a practitioner. I was a practitioner before in my other life. He who pays the piper takes the tone. You understand? So where does the NGOs get the funding from? You need to ask that question. And the question is, should NGO take the role of governance? Should NGO take the role of the people? We need to question that. So at times, we should not be criticizing the NGOs. They are not governance. We, the people, need to say, how do we start mobilizing our people to change things? Not so much about how the NGOs, but the NGO, again, you said, well, Trump came in power and is trying to cut off, you said, and a lot of funds are going. The question is that I don't think NGOs are those who will solve the problem of Nigeria. No. I think the problem of Nigeria will be solved by the Nigerian people. And the Nigerian people need to mobilize and stop this concept of it is my turn and start looking at the collective good. Only when we start looking at the collective good are we going to have some chance of making things to work. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Now there are 4 hands. We are going to ask them to ask their questions or make their comments, and then you can also respond to them at the end. So Ayo, please, and then Richard, Peter, and Janet. Ayo, could you please?
Thank you. Yeah, this is a topic that touches me. I'm a Nigerian, and what is Nigeria is what disturbs me mostly. Apart from the fact that I'm troubled with a whole lot of issues around the world, I think Nigeria is topmost. And I think the reason why is because of the fact that we have a lot of issues around the world. I think Nigeria is topmost. And I think Nigeria is because that's where I come from. And I want to thank Colins for his wonderful presentation, quite insightful. I think the problem with Nigeria is so much that we have to, the people really, we the people have to take back what is rightly ours. How we go about it is what we should ask ourselves. Because for me, state governance in Nigeria, you start with looking at the foundation of our institutional framework. It is very weak. That's so obvious. And this has provoked deterioration of the governance system and the democratic accountability. There's no accountability. You're talking about colonialism. The effect of colonialism will be there, but we should not keep saying all our problems are from colonialism. Yes, we've inherited a culture of lack of transparency, lack of accountability. The colonial masters never accounted to anyone. They just came to steal and take away. We all know this. So that culture has been within the system, and it's gotten worse. We have an elite that is not really elite. I don't know what to call them. They are not ready to be custodians of the country, that they should be leading the country after so much years, education and all that. The whole country is just, I don't know what to say when it comes to Nigeria. Honestly, it troubles me because I come from a family, my dad was a veteran. He's a veteran, he's still alive. And this is a trouble for him every day. I had to constantly talk to him. He still can't believe that Nigeria will get to this level. A country where the justice system is corrupt, the police is corrupt, the parliamentarians are corrupt. You can see what's happening to Natasha, those who are standing up and saying, no, this is insane. You hardly find them. Even some of the women are following corruption because they have weaponized poverty. So that is where our problem is. We need to free ourselves. We, the people, need to free ourselves. The politicians cannot, as Colins has rightly said, because they benefit from it and they don't have any sense of patriotism. You can hardly find any of them that are patriotic. Starting from the so-called president we have, I don't believe I have a president. Apologies, I'm saying this here, but that's my feeling, and I'm entitled to it. So this tribal thing gets me sick, and that is what has brought us here. Even a dog that is Yoruba can become president, as long as the Yorubas are supporting him. It's not about merit. It's not about who can push the country and make us a real country in the sense of it, a democratic country where human rights respected. There's nothing like that. Even the small, an NYSC girl saying she's tired of what's going on. We know her life has been threatened. Is that a country, a place where a woman is abused and the lawmakers are in support of it and she's not given a hearing? Is that a country? There's so much issue that we cannot even, no sane country will this happen. So for me, I think we, the people, we have a stake. It's our country where we're being defrauded by thieves. I see them as number one criminal. They're thieves and they're stealing from us. And some idiots are respecting them and they call themselves elites. They respect those who steal and destroy the country. They will be accountable for it. Posterity will ask them questions because we're not standing by for idiots who pretend to be leaders to be turning our country into, I don't know, what's a shithole. And when they say it's a shithole, they feel angry. But that's the truth. It's bitter, but it's the truth. So when are we going to start telling ourselves the truth? And when are we going to capture our country back from cabals, back from cultists, and back from terrorists? That's just me. I'm commenting. I am a Nigerian. Everything that Colins has said is true. And it is just, we just have to talk to ourselves. People will die, but we have to capture our country back. You don't get independence on a platter of gold. I've not seen anywhere you handed independence because those who grabbed it are going to fight back. So we should be ready. Thank you, Colins. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Richard, please.
Yes. Thank you so much for Dr. Collins, yes, for bringing in the issue, Nigeria. I believe that democracy is something small, and when it comes to leadership in a country, in that when someone is governing, what you should know is that it is the same as someone sitting at a store and then putting her things or his items for people to buy. When you are when you are there thinking a leader is 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 what is it? What should I say? It's looting. Then maybe they are looting. Uh, 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 they are looting. What is it? This simple, small tax that has been gathered for them to use as what is it? Uh, or what should I say? A capital. But in reality, governments are not compared to a social work. A vast. Just recently, did I know that even this gold mines and petroleum that we are seeing, government, it's for government, it's for the government. Individuals traveled somewhere and came and established them. And later, the government came in for little taxes to be given or a shares to be given. You see? So when you are outside of the government, you think petroleum is for the government, it's for the country. You realize that it's for one person. You think it's for a country. No, it's for somebody. So the little, share that the government has in it, that he uses for its what is it? Its whether development or for their looting. So normally in Ghana, we advise that when someone stands in for election, don't mind him at all. Let him go because he is with himself. And then you stick to what you are doing. You see. So how can someone say that the water is for me? That I own this water, I own this. What is it? The whole Nigeria? No, it can't be possible. Maybe out of anger or out of something that he says it. But I will advise my brothers and sisters in Nigeria that when you think about when you think about government too much, you by all means lose something. Don't mind them, and then go on what you're doing, and that is it. This is a little advice that I have. I'm a bit troubled on that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Richard, Peter, and then Janet and Stella. Peter, please.
Oh, thank you very much. I was in Nigeria as a young person, age 16. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Yes.
In 1963 and 4, I went to a school. I think later Sonny Abacha went to that school. So I experienced the situation that you described, Professor. And I substantiate your version of events. In the north, in Zaria, there was a lot of resentment of the South because jobs were going to people from the South. I took the train, the railroad to Nguru on Christmas break with my chum from school. And just experienced the shock of culture shock, the shock of being in a completely unfamiliar world. The railroad was built from the resources to the coast to extract minerals and so on, agricultural groundnuts, as quickly and efficiently as possible out of the country for a pittance. Foreign influence, I would say interference, continues, and it has kept pace with change. So colonialism is still absolutely holding sway across the continent under various disguises. And I have to say that we are getting our comeuppance now. The USA is now a colony of Israel, and we don't know it yet. Almost nobody would credit that. I hardly dare to say it in public, but it is the case. So we have now, it's now come back to roost, as it were. And for me, this shows that we are not separate. Genocide is not happening somewhere else. It is all of us. Some of us are under the bombs, and some of us are dropping the bombs, and some of us are in a place where there's no bombs falling right now. But none of us are innocent, I should say. And all of us are now confronted with the responsibility for humanity, for all of humanity. And our only access is our personal behavior, because collective behavior is what got us to this point. And our personal behavior is our collective behavior. I've run past my text here. Achebe's book was a great gift when I was there in 1963. It oriented me in a way that I would have completely missed otherwise. And I've had an opportunity to thank Mr. Achebe. So I'm grateful for that. And I'm glad that Ms. Jiang was able to speak. She has been an activist and a very effective scholar. Okay, enough for me.
Thank you, Peter.
Thank you so much, Peter. Janet, and then we will close with Stella Sholika.
Colins, thank you for this really, really well done performance or presentation. It's really deep and excellent, and it really shows your true learning of your professorship, of your doctorate, of the really so impressive and so enlightening to see how you've applied it to the case of Nigeria. You answered a question I've always had since I've known you, like, where are you from? Because, wait, I'm confused. I'm confused because I think countries are countries, but now you explain, oh, but it's where your grandfather and ancestors are from. That's where you're actually from. And so I really appreciate that. And the third thing is I want to raise the concept of the glass ceiling, which is when I explained this to my sociology professor, Harrison White, a sociolinguistic person. He said it's more like a plastic bag that comes down and snuffs you out. And I had a dance company, and I could see that when they decided they didn't want live performances anymore, Rudolph Giuliani, a friend of Trump's, they just shut us all down. They pulled out the money. And I think I bring it up because this is parallel to the limits of NGOs. Look at what just happened to USAID. But it's not Trump. He's just like a cartoon figure, an explosive, dangerous character who's representing, like you said, big money, big elites, and countries like yours. We were just in the Conference on Status of Women comparing the situation of Colombia and of the DRC, the Congo, where the violence just doesn't stop. In Colombia, they made peace accords, and it's not the government fighting anymore. It's not the guerrillas. It's gangs. It's drug gangs that are fighting each other. So who's funding them, as Peter says? Where's the armament coming from? These questions are really need to be held in complement with a really fine explanation of democracy and people that you brought up. Thank you so very much.
Thank you, Janet.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And Lukong Shulika, welcome.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. Sorry, I cannot come online on camera. I would like to thank the presenter for the very insightful presentation. It was both informative, thought-provoking, and being an African, my mind was flying all over the place, trying to reflect on different scenarios. So when I think of homegrown democracy, I would say indeed it is a crucial lens through which we can use to examine governance in Africa especially. But then, as the presenter mentioned, when we look at it, we have this whole concept, liberal democracy, that has long been promoted as the ideal model, right? However, when we look at it, its application in Africa has often fallen short of uplifting the society. Why? Because when we look at governance related issues in Africa, we have issues of conflict, we have instability, and as a result, peace remains elusive, all linked to these governance related issues. So when I think about it and looking at the homegrown democracy, we have traditional governance systems that are deeply embedded in the African society. And these were present actually before colonialism. And when we think of post-colonial era, some of these structures have remained in place and some upcoming ones, they are functional. For example, in Rwanda, we have the Gishasha courts. There is one in Botswana, which I can't even pronounce. And then we have the one in Ethiopia, which is the Gilina, I think, right? So when we look at these structures, they have actually been working in these countries, and these structures, they emphasize consensus building, community participation, conflict resolution, and they also contribute to legitimacy and trust in the governance systems of the country. And as the presenter mentioned, there are traditional systems in Nigeria. And when I think of my own country, Cameroon, we do have several traditional systems. For example, we have the fund system in the grass field, we have the Lamida system and the coastal chieftaincy system, all of which are functional at the local level. But however, they are not integrated into the national level. But at the local level, this system actually share some democratic values like accountability, participation, collective decision making, and all that. However, thinking about this and the fact that we have systems that work at the local level, but not necessarily at the national level, and with my mind all over the place and excited about, very happy that I attended the presentation. What comes to mind and in me reflecting is I would like to know from the presenter if he thinks it is possible, given that we have workable systems, traditional systems, at the local level as it be, if he thinks it is possible for African states to actually balance traditional governance models with democratic principles, or is it possible for African states to institutionalize homegrown democratic models while also ensuring that they align to the universal human rights and governance standards, especially as we know that the issues of human rights are quite there when it comes to Africa and politics. Then the second question is, can homegrown democratic models effectively address the ethnic, the political, and economic divisions and conflicts that we have in our continent? And what role do you think intergenerational leadership can play in strengthening indigenous governance systems for long-term peace and security in the African continent? Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Stella, and Democracy at Work. I can see also Madeline Musami raising her hand. You are welcome, Madeline. Nice to see you. And that will be the last one. But actually, after this, after the recording has stopped, we are going to continue with the networking phase. So you're welcome to stay around. So thank you so much, Madeline. You're welcome.
Thank you so much, George, and thank you to everybody who's participating. It's really good to see so many of the familiar people again and to listen to this presentation. There's one aspect, and I'm going to start with the Berlin Conference. You know, when we established the Organization of African Unity, the intention of the founding fathers was that there would be a unified Africa. And this is why we had the loss of Gaddafi in Libya, and we had so many other assassinations, the loss of Samora Machel, etc., etc., the dilution of the Nyerere experience, and all of these things. And we started to have to go back into a neo-colonial kind of perspective. Now, for me, I want to say the intention of the Berlin Conference 1884 was one, to decide who chooses what in Africa, right? Which country in Africa. Now, my concern is that, sorry, my battery now is low because I'm not having my charger on. My concern is that the OAU was a means of counteracting Berlin. And the AU was a means of counteracting Berlin. Now, the first thing that I get concerned about is when Nigeria speaks about its democracy, lack of participation, the elite in Nigeria, etc., etc. Why are we not speaking about the Niger Delta and what happened when the women took to the forefront in the Delta to say, but the oil also belongs to the women of the country? And you have a very big percentage of Nigerians in the diaspora. This is not to say that we are not allowed to travel outside of where we want to be. But if you remember the regime of Khama, Ian Khama in Botswana, and when Ian Khama decided to oppress the journalists, the academics, and everybody else, including myself, there was no counter defense from the African Union, because the United States runs their operation, their military operation from Botswana. My issue that I have is one, if we say that democracy is something that is not being fully achieved in Nigeria, we need there to be Nigerians in Nigeria who are doing what they need to do to counter the constant neo-colonial fight, because it is depending on who's going to pay a higher price for oil. So where are we? How do we then position the issue of democracy and the theft of mineral resources? You cannot have a democracy if mineral resources are not at the heart of who controls it. And for me, I'm very fervent because the changes of from Obasanjo, etc., in Nigeria, the changes in dispensations in Nigeria are so fickle and so fragile. Every other minute you have another president, you have another leadership, because it depends on who pays the highest price. My first point is to say, look, I don't want to go into the United States dynamics. That's their problem to deal with. The problem that we have in South Africa, in Africa, in the continent, when we raise the issue of democracy, is to say, what is first the role of the African Union in terms of ensuring unity? We have Morocco, who is at war with the Western Sahara. We say nothing about it. But Nigeria has given their support to the point that they have to the Western Sahara and its liberation. But even within the other liberated territories in Africa, you now have coup d'etats that you are dealing with because you cannot depend on the leadership. When the people, like we spoke about the French Revolution and the Industrial Revolution and there was, whatever revolution, the liberation of Africa. The liberation of Africa did not come at a small price. It came with a heavy price. And I'm saying, and this is my statement, George, and to all the other colleagues, let's colonize the colonizer. Let's stop complaining about the colonizer and let's colonize the colonizer. Thank you so much, George, and thank you to the colleagues.
Thank you so much, Madeline. And I'm going to ask now the rest of us, if Collins, you allow us, maybe you answer these questions in another time. We can discuss these ones at length, because I can see that we are really way out of time, and I know that some people must go to other businesses. This is really difficult to know what to do. But this is because this has been very exciting. It's just already like the African International Conference has already begun, that you've been inviting us to take part in. So Collins, please, if you can just briefly, give us the take home. Yes, please.
All right. Yeah. Thank you, George, and thank you, everybody. Thank you, Janet. Thank you, Richard. Thank you, Peter. Thank you, Ayo. Thank you, Mandaline. Thank you, Local. I think my take, just because we're run out of time, one thing we need to look at is that I do not believe that African democratic principles are not democratic. I do not think that they do not respect human rights. Again, you have to look at the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. You have to look at the civil and political rights. You have to look at economic and social rights. Why a lot of Western countries seem to pay a lot of emphasis on the civic and political rights. What of the economic and social rights? A lot of people do not hear about that. Again, if you look at the history of how human rights came about, the Declaration of Human Rights, the Eastern Bloc and the Western Bloc, there's almost that argument, in terms of we should confess. So that's why you have a different protocol for the civic and political right and have a different protocol for the social and economic right. The implication of this is that these issues are constantly being debated. Countries decide where do they actually play their emphasis. Why the Eastern Bloc at 1948, 1949, we're paying a lot of emphasis on the social and economic right. The Western blocs were paying a lot of emphasis on the civic and political right. So where do we draw the line? So at times we need to understand these dynamics when we discuss human rights and looking at it within the African perspective. Where do we stand? Are we standing about the social and economic right, or are we talking about the civil and political right? We can go on and on and on around those debates, because at times people say, maybe sometime I might give another talk on human rights in Africa, because we need to look at those dynamics. What exactly do we mean when we talk about human rights in Africa? Whose right? Who enforces this right? Who has the obligations? So that's about that, because that's a very important question you raise. I do not think that the traditional African principles of governance do not respect human rights. There are blemishes of here and there. No system is perfect, but those little gaps can always be addressed. Again, what was happening in the 1960s, 1950s, 1850s, in terms of how our forefathers administered justice, is not what's applicable now. Society change. Because society changed, there need to be some kind of changes. So when we talk about traditional African governance system, we're not looking at the governance system of the 18th, 19th, or 20th century. We need to look at it from the modern era. How do we change? So, more like our take home in this is that we need to start looking at Africa, looking at Nigeria, looking at African country. Where do we want to be? What are the systems we need to put in place in order to get there? So that comes to the intergenerational debate. The way our forefathers look at things and the way the present generation look at things are quite different. But there must be a root in a value. When you have no value, then you have no structure. The structure of democracies in the US, in the UK, in Switzerland, in France is based on a structure, and that structure is the value, is the culture of the people. So we need to start asking ourselves, where is our culture? Where is our value on which we are going to build up? We can't build up on a model that is not our own model. We can't build on a model that people are not happy about. We can't build on a model that seems to oppress people. We can't build on a model that people seem to think is alien to them. So that's where the deliberative approach needs to come in, where people need to agree on the basis to live together. Look at the conflict we're having all over the place. Go to Sudan, North Sudan, go to Congo, all over the place. There's conflict all over the place. Why are all these conflicts happening? And they're supposed to be democratic countries. We need to question what kind of democracy is that. Look at the Congo. Conflict is ad infinitum. Look at the youngest country in Africa, South Sudan. Look at even Sudan. So we need to we can't even talk about Somali. So we need to start asking ourselves, what is that democratic principles we're talking about? It's not about the culture. It's not about tradition. It's about people sitting down to discuss and agree on how do we resolve issues. And that's the basis of my presentation, that consensus is the basis of the African deliberative process. So we need to go back to that consensus process, not a winner takes all. The winner takes all is not our process. So till we agree on that, we'll not move forward. So we need to go back to the root. And the root is the deliberative process where we all agree by consensus on how to move forward. So George and everybody, I think my last comment in this is that we should go back to our basis. And the basis is a consensus method of resolving conflict, where everybody has the opinion and we agree that what is good for the common good, and we move on that. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much indeed, Collins. Thank you, everyone. Really, this has been amazing. And I look forward to seeing you again actually next week. And we'll be actually discussing Congo. So democracy continues. Thank you so much indeed, and all the best.
Thank you very much.
For now.
Thank you, George, too.